Welcome to the Know Your Fundamentals podcast, the show designed to help professional moms like you empower your well-being, strengthen family bonds, and excel in your career while thriving your way. I'm your host, Kelly Berthold, a fellow professional mom, licensed clinical social worker, wellness educator, advocate, and coach. And I created this podcast to provide a space where we can connect foundational principles of well-being with real-life, actionable insights that help us feel more connected to ourselves and others. If you're juggling life, family, and career while seeking balance and authentic connection, this podcast is for you. Each episode, we'll hear from our neighbors, uncover the extraordinary in ordinary life, find patterns that help us recognize opportunities for well-being, and get practical, fundamental tips to thrive in your wellness, relationships, parenting, and professional life. You're the expert on you, and I'm here to help you thrive your way. I'm so glad that you're here. Let's jump in. Hi, welcome to the Know Your Fundamentals podcast. Today, we're excited to bring Kerri Zelman on board with us today. She's a massage therapist, an experienced yoga teacher, and owner of Boalsburg Yoga and Wellness Studio. So today, our main topic with Kerri is going to be discussing healing power of therapeutic yoga. And Kerri will explore with us how therapeutic yoga provides a gentle yet effective approach to physical and emotional well-being by focusing on mindful movement and breath work, as well as therapeutic yoga promoting resilience and creating a space for vitality. So welcome, Kerri. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Talking about a little bit about what you do in the community and, about your work and your practice, wherever you'd like to start.
Sure. Well, the most recent is becoming the owner of Boalsburg Yoga and Wellness. That started in September 2023. And I took over the yoga studio that was formerly here. I had been teaching there for 12 years, and even longer than teaching yoga, I've been a massage therapist. So that's where my entry point into working in the world of somatics began, I would say. And yeah, there's a whole story as far as my relationship with yoga and with my teacher in particular in the studio that she had, and how I got to be here.
Yeah. Well, you think that word somatic, right? So we know somatic maybe with like a very like clinical or like body kind of language, but we were taught somatics, right? So can you explain a little bit from your perspective, yoga and massage therapy and what somatics mean to you and what you provide in like that body work?
Sure. Well, somatic, one basic definition is just that it refers to the body. Yoga is a somatic practice. Tai Chi is a somatic practice. Dancing is a somatic practice. Bodywork, there's a giver and a receiver. I mean, we can do bodywork on ourselves, but it involves the body. And specifically in the context that I'm referring to, it's a body of knowledge around integrating the body into a healing process.
Yeah. So connecting with the body and how we're connecting to the body. So when it comes to like your yoga practice, how do you think about somatics and helping people connect to their body?
That's a good question. I think of yoga as a somatic practice. And then in this kind of vast world, especially in this Western culture, there's so many different types of yoga. Some people are starting to use the term somatic yoga.
Okay.
Which seems redundant to me, but I understand that it's meant to reflect that if someone's calling their yoga somatic, it means that it's inviting you into a more internal meditative experience, as compared to something that's maybe just more of a workout type of yoga. Or, goat yoga, I don't think would be considered somatic, but, you're definitely using your body, but it's also that more mindful internal connection with yourself.
Yeah. So really noticing what does my body feel like? How am I noticing what my body is doing with either like pain or stretching or discomfort, and really reflecting inward on these physiological experiences that we're having and how we're relating to those physiological experiences that we're experiencing when we're doing movement, right?
Exactly.
So I know like from our differences are you work very much with like the body and mind connection, right? But body
is more the focus and connecting to the mind. And then a lot of my work in like mental health is how do I recognize what's happening in my mind to better connect to my body, but not necessarily leading people into, yoga. And it doesn't mean that an individual cannot be able to have that exploration. They can do that without yoga. They can do that without massage therapy. They can do that without seeing a mental health provider, right? So like this awareness of what our body is experiencing and just being okay with even being uncomfortable in connecting to our body, but trying to establish that connection and relationship with the mind and body collectively together. So is that something that you explore with your therapy work and your massage?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many different levels, just from the outside in, just addressing more of the physical body, and then just getting into more of the emotional stuff that comes up if you are seeking more of a therapeutic approach versus, just sort of like I said before, a workout. You can be receiving the benefits therapeutically without that necessarily being the reason you're seeking to go to a yoga class or get a massage. You can also be using specifically yoga, I would say, just because it's a much more interactive with yourself kind of practice than just receiving body work, although that's always gonna have its effect as well. But specifically with yoga, there's a mindfulness and an internal awareness connection that's wanting to be fostered. That's really one of the main reasons for practicing yoga, is to foster that connection to, what we can call yourself, your true self, your higher self, your true nature, and starting to get beyond these layers of obstruction, confusion, conditioning, the things that are getting in the way of whatever we feel like we're working towards in terms of optimal functioning and joy and thriving and those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a lot about these intersections of like learning how to be present in the reality of like some of these things that we're experiencing so we can process through it and not feel like we're kind of like chasing our tail sometimes and all this other work, right? So it's a being able to be present and learning how to be compassionately present, right? So like some of the things that you're talking about here, providing a gentle yet effective approach to physical and emotional well-being, right? Where is it that you bring it and that embodiment of this gentleness? What does that mean to you in the work that you provide?
Well, I would say that one of the main light bulbs, I guess, for me back when, let's see, I didn't get into yoga really until I have 2 children. So I'm a mom, and I didn't get into yoga until after I had kids, and I found a style of yoga that I loved that was very slow. So it's a slow movement practice. And, we have a great yoga community here in State College, lots of different yoga studios, even more so now than back when I was first getting into it. But I was definitely going around trying a bunch of different types of classes and, just trying to figure out what I liked, and slow meditative approach is definitely what resonated with me, even though I found it hard to slow down. So that's very common. There's lots of sort of faster moving, hot and sweaty kinds of yoga, but this slower, more mindful approach, and also very focused on the breath. And then, I practiced that for years and got into teaching it, obviously, for years. And then also started noticing the effect it was having on me. It's not just in terms of, you go through a practice and you do Shavasana at the end and then you feel better and then you go on about your day. But because, there's always that. You always feel great. Like, what keeps you coming back to a class that might be challenging, whether it's because of the physical challenges of whatever you're doing in the class, or the challenge of slowing down and becoming present with yourself and what's happening in your mind, because inevitably that's the next layer of where we go in a yoga practice. So I've often said that the body is just the body, we're in this body. It's a very definitive, finite container. And it's a trick to get us to pay attention to what's going on in our mind as far as the practice of asana, the physical postures that we do in yoga. And then the breath layer also was a big transformational aspect of how I started to shift my consciousness and my outlook on life and how I perceived myself. Oh, yeah, there's a lot to that.
But I think that hearing you kind of talk about, there was an exploration to find something that connected uniquely to you and how you felt like you wanted to explore yourself. So sometimes there's this saying that when we're doing businesses or we're creating things, like we're our own best customer, right? We create things because we're like, I know how much this has impacted me. And I know there must be other people out there that are seeking the same sort of support and release or connection that I was lost and now I feel found through the work that I did. And now I want to provide that for other people who are looking for those services or that support or that connection, what have you. So what was it for you that you may have not necessarily immediately known specifically what you were looking for? You just knew that there was a searching element and that you became aware that there were certain things that you wanted supported in yourself and that maybe you found through your yoga practice. So what was it that you became aware of when you were originally looking into types of yoga or even how you wanted to teach it?
Yeah. So I guess just to answer that and to kind of go along with just the previous topic was just, I was struggling in my life. And like I said, I'm a mom, but I was also a single mom. I had been divorced, or let's say I was a mom and married and divorced by the time I was 28. So that's, very young to have now, especially looking back, to have gone through all of that and really not had a strong support network, just kind of feel like I'm fumbling along in life and try to do the best for my kids. And also having this awareness of, emotional stuff. I hadn't really gotten into therapy yet. I didn't have a context or a guide or names for things, especially like we do now. And so, like I said, I found yoga and it became this place where I started feeling better, not just after a class, but over the longer term. I could start to feel these longer term changes, but also stuff was coming up for me. And then, like, parallel to all of that, as a body worker, I was also receiving body work and certain types of body work that were gentler and more light touch kind of approaches were fast forward to where I started getting into understanding more about the nervous system. So putting my nervous system into a of greater peace and
safety, right?
Safety, absolutely, for sure. I didn't know that that's what it was at the time. But yeah, so like a lot of people who get into teaching yoga, I was feeling the healing power of yoga and I wanted to share with everybody, right? So I got into teaching. I was very passionate about pursuing teaching and sharing. And I will say that I consider myself an eternal student of yoga. I mean, anyone who is really on a path of healing and someone who finds yoga on that path knows that it's infinite, and yoga is a vast ocean of philosophy, psychology, physiology. There's so many layers to it. So it's infinite. But this, just the learning how to create space for myself. And definitely part of that was in the context of being with others, like going to a class with other people and having a teacher who was a guide through an experience versus, just being home alone. I mean, that's good too. Do a practice with yourself at home. But, fast forward again to this more recent past 5 or so years that I've been studying the nervous system, it just really, again, another light bulb or like 100 light bulbs went off because I had never learned about the nervous system in all these years of teaching and studying. And then someone one day just suggested that I might be interested in what we now call trauma-informed care. I was teaching a workshop online. It was right at the beginning of COVID, and I was doing a breathing practice online every day. And one of my girlfriends was taking it, and she suggested that I might be interested in taking a workshop because things that I was saying were resonating with what she was learning. She was taking a trauma-informed care training with therapists online. It had nothing to do with yoga, but just that broader paradigm that's emerging now with trauma-informed care. And so if you're going to take a trauma-informed care training, whether it has to do with yoga or not, you're inevitably going to learn about your nervous system. And so then thus began a whole other path that is really where I'm focused now, because it put my experiences with my own yoga practice and my life in general, and what I'd come to learn about myself as I sought help with therapy for the struggles that I was having and for the stuff that was coming up for me in my yoga practice, just kind of put it all in this other context that really made it make a lot more sense than it ever had before.
Yeah. And even just like kind of connecting to a lot of those points that I think, especially individuals that maybe grew up before, like you could Google everything, right? A lot of learning subsequently had to come from experience, an experience that may have not necessarily been initially connected to like actual definitions and like text, right? So we learn through that experience, and like what you're kind of describing is like you recognize through your awareness of the experience of yoga and being around other people and having these connections and how it made your body feel and how it made your emotions feel, that this was healing to you. And it wasn't necessarily until like later, as you're like reading and you're doing like the research and you're connecting some of these dots, that you're like, oh, I understand why. And when the information is met with experience, right, it becomes like supercharged power almost, right? It's like with my powers combined, I'm Captain Planet kind of a deal, right? So like you have all these different elements, and now it's like, wow, I feel so empowered now. Before it's like I knew this felt good to me, and I knew intrinsically, I could feel it in my body that this made sense and I can keep building and exploring. And when my mind knew and was able to make definitions of why these things were important to me, right? It's again, these connections between a deeper understanding. So I often say that it's a combination between information and experience that allows for knowledge, or to make it sound even, what can sometimes be seen as hokey is that's actually the definition of wisdom, right? Wisdom is to be able to experience something and have this integrated understanding through our own experiences and information that allow us to be wise, right? Wise within ourselves, right? So when that wisdom too, like you may be familiar with beginner's mindset. Is that something that's familiar to you, right?
Sure.
And this ever growing and learning experience that we don't aim to necessarily be experts. We aim to be curious, right? Curious and open and wondering what else may lay here too. And the journey of being able to say, wow, I'm connecting so many dots here, and the excitement of just being able to say, wow, this makes so much sense, right? But I think a lot of the work that is similar to what you and I do, and what a lot of individuals do, is when we have some of that wisdom, we want to pass it on to see if it can also help other individuals gain experience and information in a shorter period of time to potentially decrease their suffering, right? So maybe it took me 20 years to get to this point of understanding through my own experience and information what has allowed me to have like this deeper wisdom. But maybe I can share that with someone and it takes them 4 years to get to that point, right? And how am I aiding in the benefit of society, right? And humanity by sharing this wisdom for people to be able to incorporate into their own lives. So I know that sounded like a lot, but connecting these things for you, where is it that like you feel like this was connecting intrinsically to your own unique interests? Where was it that and even like how old you were, like when you were like, wow, this just feels so good to me to do this thing, that I'm doing it because of interest, not necessarily just because of pain. And I guess that's like the difference between I'm choosing something to do because it's not a fear-based decision. It's a self-trust based decision and following what feels good. Or did you feel like you were doing fear-based decisions when you were choosing yoga?
No,
Can you explore that a little bit, that awareness?
I mean, one of the main effects of a long-term yoga practice, and you can have this awakening without yoga, but you come to realize or see through the illusion, especially within our culture, of all the conditioning that affects how we view ourselves and others and the world around us. So just starting to, as a mother, I was very aware, I had this intrinsic awareness that there were some relational dynamics that I didn't want to pass on to my children. And, that's unavoidable. But I had an awareness of that, which even before having children, A lot of us don't necessarily have that, it just happens when it happens for people. For me, motherhood at such a young age, and then just how, getting so into yoga and understanding trauma healing and all of that, it's like it just became empowering as a woman, as a human on the planet, as a living being, in a culture that doesn't always make sense. And, we get conditioned by our families, we get conditioned by our cultures. So in order to, I think, feel true joy in life, we want to have a good sense of ourselves. That was something that was, I would say, pretty lost. I was pretty lost in terms of my connection to self, just based on what I can now say was my own conditioning, So overcoming that and finding, it's not like I've overcome all my conditioning and I'm good now, but just, getting a certain sense of connection to myself in a way where I can put things in perspective and
awareness, right? Without
Absolutely.
awareness, there is no perspective. It can't
Absolutely.
exist, right?
Right. So just, and then now I'm responsible for 2 other people growing up with my children, and how I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to perpetuate these unhealthy relational patterns that I've learned were just born out of the pain of previous generations. You get to a certain point, and I think we go through phases of, it's part of this archetypal journey of healing, of, going into the underground and having to be in that darkness and be with the unknown and the uncomfortable and the painful, and then coming back out into the light and then feeling more integrated. And so it affects every relationship in our lives when we have a change of perspective, just how we communicate and how we establish boundaries and how we take care of ourselves and each other. It can be hard for me to articulate because I'm so absorbed in it, and then I just happened to, I always say, I kind of fumbled onto this path of yoga and got into teaching, and very grateful for the opportunity that I've had for the past many years to be in a studio where I was just able to gain experience putting myself in front of a group of people and leading them through a practice that has become very much not just about like the beginning, the middle, and the end of a yoga class. It's about guiding people into being with themselves. And like I say a lot, it doesn't really matter what you're doing with your body. This isn't about follow the leader. This is about doing what you can do. And I want to give you options so that we can be together. And maybe we're doing things differently with our bodies, but we're still having that connected experience with ourselves. And then, of course, together with each other, because that's a huge part of what our nervous systems need, is that sense of connection.
Yeah. But I think too, just like recognizing that, like with your own journey and that introspection and insight, it fostered a trust in the curiosity of those experiences. And even you being present in that room and guiding them and sharing with them, we can be present together without it being follow the leader or the beginning or middle or end. You are communicating in ways that it is also applying trust yourself in navigating this experience. Be wondering of what may be happening here. And I'm here too. And we're all here supporting each other, right? We can't have those conversations, even if we're saying it very nonchalantly in that moment. That is a learned ability to share wisdom, even in that statement, right? How can you tell someone to trust the experience if you aren't aware of what they may be going through, of the ins and outs, and even like the discomforts of wondering whether or not they're trusting that moment, or if they don't like this moment and they're judging themselves for it, because you understand and have that introspection and awareness from your own experience, right? Mm-hmm. So that insight is invaluable to be able to share it with other people. And I think those are things that can really, I sometimes will go in a room with someone and this is going to sound terrible. Like, don't ever be friends with a psychotherapist. Right? I'm not trying to say I'm analyzing people, but sometimes just like I can be aware of someone's level of introspection based on like how they're communicating in their presence in their body. And that like my body then shifts to either protect them sometimes in that place, right? And like they're maybe not comfortable here, so I'll pivot and do this, right? So when we become more aware, we have some of that insight, we can help foster every environment that we're in to be more proactive in that space. So whether, Kerri, you're probably teaching yoga or you're going into the grocery store, right? That wisdom is following you and is a part of all these elements of your experience, right? But you get to intentionally practice it when you're guiding yoga and when you're practicing it, right? Like you have your intentional spaces and then you have your living life spaces. Is that something that you feel like it's just really integrated with you now, that you're kind of like just present with,
I mean,
not 100% of the day, right? But like,
exactly.
it's the ins and outs of it.
I mean, one of the really like intrinsic practices of yoga is it's a mindfulness practice of just becoming aware of the way your mind works and becoming aware of your thoughts, learning to identify with that part of you that is not your thoughts, right? Like there's a field and you're sitting and you're looking at the field, and so you can think of the field as your body or your thoughts, but the part of you that is looking at the field is not your body, is not your thoughts. So that's a very universal spiritual theme of just that witness consciousness and becoming the observer and tapping into that part of you that is eternal and unfettered by the fluctuations of experience and emotion. Not that we're to be cut off from them, but to be able to step back and say, okay, especially when it comes to pain and discomfort, like this is happening or that happened, but I can step back from it for a minute even and just be the observer and connect with the part of me that's okay, aside from what might not be okay. And then just having years of experience of practicing being in a room with people, I'm very comfortable with it. And, you know, it's just, I've had enough life experience at this point now. I feel like I'm past the age of 50 and my kids have grown and flown the coop. And it's exactly what you said. Like I'm an eternal student, but I feel like I might be starting to have some wisdom to share, especially the more people that come into the studio who, you know, are clearly like worried about what it's going to look like or be like, you know, like, am I doing it right? And so really just helping people settle down and it's all going to be okay. And so,
yeah, that comfort coming from experience, right? So like the more we do something, the more we build skillful means of understanding that we can just get on that bike, right? It's like, oh, I've gone and done the Tour de France 5 times. It's like, they're going to be a lot more comfortable with riding, you know, through the mountains of France or wherever versus someone who's like, I can't even imagine like flying to France, right? It's like that experience brings a comfort of knowing too, because I've seen it, right?
yeah.
And even when we get in the practice of these simple moments of being able to see the field, sometimes, so what we're describing here, many different ways of practicing things have different definitions, right? But a horse by any other name is still a horse. So I'm going to use the word meta awareness. So meta awareness is kind of like being aware of how you're thinking. And then there's metacognition, which is our ability to think about our thinking and how we want to think about our thinking differently. So we get to kind of reposition things. So we have cognitive abilities in our brain to be able to, almost like a director in the camera, right? We're saying, what is happening between me and the lens and what I'm asking these actors to kind of like play out, right? And I can see it, and then I can decide, how do I want to redirect the scene? And then I can behave on that, right? So, oh, I recognize I behaved in this kind of way, or I was feeling kind of insecure. Now that I'm aware of it, I can accept that reality and then make a different choice or choose to make a similar choice. But if I'm not aware of it and I'm not necessarily able to see the reality of that field, it's really hard for me to make intentional, active, purposeful choices that allow me to walk through that field differently and not just be reactive every moment and just responding to every moment based on habits and you're kind of saying like conditioning of our lives and our experiences. So, and whenever we were attempting to practice, this awareness of whatever we're feeling allows us to then make more intentional choices. And a part of our conversation too today is about being able to have emotional well-being by mindful movement and breath work, right? So the purpose of the breath even in regulating ourselves so we can think more clearly. Anybody who knows that they've ever felt very overwhelmed or very out of control, either physically or emotionally, knows that it is incredibly difficult to think constructively and to make other types of choices and decisions when we feel so under threat, right? And even like this thought of like trauma is a hypervigilance. Our body is scanning for threats because it doesn't want to be caught unaware if a sudden threat just kind of shows up and like, makes life suddenly very, very difficult. So how do you use somatics, breath work, gentleness? How are your approaches to kind of cultivate this awareness? Because the body has to be in some state of safety in order to even explore it. So how do you approach your yoga to cultivate that safety so the exploration can take place? And that will kind of maybe even segue a little bit into like the nervous system.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is repetition. You just have to find a way to keep repeating a practice. And it doesn't have to, you don't have to come to a yoga class. You don't have to do it for an hour, but there's a real like shift that happens with, you can take your little vitamin every day, or it's like watering a plant, you need to do it regularly to keep helping the system thrive. So once I started learning about the nervous system, because one thing I really struggled with was in the yoga method that I was very steeped in, and it was presented to me within this very spiritual context. And I kept thinking, or was like really like all in the emotions of it all, and like understanding that I felt like I was stuck somewhere. And if I just kept doing my practice, like at some point I would, get unstuck. And so, like I said, when I learned about the nervous system, this whole new level of awareness came, that it wasn't an emotional thing. It wasn't just about like doing your practice regularly and being a good yoga practitioner. It was just like understanding that it's your nervous system. It is physiological, and it takes the emotion out of it. And so that if you just show up, to tend to your nervous system on a regular basis, you can help yourself come back into a more regulated or balanced state, right? So like most of us are stuck in either a hyper aroused or a hypo aroused state. And it's pretty much just like Goldilocks. It's either too much, too little, or just right. So we want to be in that just right state, and we want to foster, to use a very kind of neutral, unfancy term, homeostasis. Be in a state of homeostasis. We want to promote our physiology to be in a state of homeostasis, and even more than homeostasis, which is just balance, like being in balance, but in this state of safety and trust. And as mammals, so this is where I'm going to start talking about the nervous system more, because we are mammals. Most mammals spend the majority of their time resting. And, other than humans, we are chronically stressed and chronically just, I use this like wide-eyed, it's either this or it's this. You're either, like I said, hyper aroused and like overstimulated all the time, and in that chronic stress state, or you're hypo aroused, you're shut down, struggling with depression, can't find that energy to come up,
repressing, being avoiding, trying to like get distance away from the things that feel overly stressful. And there were this up and down,
so that's
major fluctuations, outliers.
Realizing like, I'm struggling because of what I'm learning about my life history, but also how it affected my nervous system. So my nervous system is stuck, and my yoga practice has been helping me get unstuck. But I'm also not, yoga is also kind of this very mysterious, ancient, esoteric thing. And so the Western science language of it has really helped it land for me, and helped it make sense to me, and helped me feel more comfortable and confident communicating with others, especially when it comes to applying it very specifically for treatment. Like, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a doctor, but I've been studying a lot about the nervous system, and then that with my own experience. We're living in a culture where healthcare is not really, we need a major paradigm shift there. Learning about our nervous systems and how not only it affects, chronic inflammation in our body, but also our relationships with others, people who just are very reactive and there's not a lot of peace and real communication happening, are very shut down. It just affects everything. And so once I started learning about the nervous system, ironically, I all of a sudden had all this compassion for myself, which is also the goal of spiritual practice. But I wasn't finding it so much within like the spiritual context that I was trying to make fit on me. And then I realized, it's okay. Not everything has to fit. And then I discovered the nervous system language, and that fit a lot better for me and really turned on my capacity to have more compassion for myself and for others, and to understand more about what the hell was going on with me and with other people in my life. And yeah, so I've often talked about trauma-informed care as like the science of compassion.
Absolutely. And these are even like some of the reasons why I created Know Your Fundamentals, is because these are the fundamentals, right? Like it's really hard. And what your experience is, and what I also shared in my experience, was I wanted to know something beyond theory and storytelling, right? Oh, well, if you do these things, like why? Why will it help me? What is it that it's affecting my nervous system? What is it helping in my brain? What are the neural connections that are firing or wiring? I want to understand this so I'm not just associating this with bad character, and understand that this is biology. Because when you know it's biology, it helps take the shame that there's something inherently wrong with me all out of it. Because if there's not something inherently wrong with any of us, it's these storytellings and these, again, like these perspectives of you just need to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and just get over it, right? Or eventually you'll hit, some spiritual place where it will just kind of alleviate. It's like, but what if it doesn't? And then I don't know what to do about it. And I just judge and blame myself that I wasn't able to get there, because you're not providing something that's concrete. And maybe not everyone needs something that is concrete, but there's many people like you and I that absolutely benefit from more concrete information that can be combined with the experience. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't live in India. I'm not Indian, and I don't feel comfortable adapting certain, traditions that don't, it's just, there's enough appropriation going on in the world of yoga. I definitely do not want to perpetuate that. And there's nothing wrong with adopting certain practices and understanding where they came from and giving homage to that and honoring your lineage and your teachers. Absolutely. But yeah, just kind of, continuing on the path of being my authentic self and not worrying about what other people thought, and seeing, like what resonates, what's getting, the other thing is, in just talking with my friends and understanding that my struggles were common, like there's a common struggle that we have. We all have our different stories and our different experiences with them, learning how to trust yourself and not judge yourself, and dealing with guilt and shame and all of those sort of common struggles, and just realizing you're not alone in that, and realizing that it might
lead to the ocean,
your nervous system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so just learning that there are things you can do that, you just learn how to integrate into your daily life to keep watering the plant, the garden of your soul kind of idea. And it is, being compassionate toward yourself is a constant practice. So,
yeah. Well, one more thing, maybe before we just jump into our fundamentals, but what is a way that you feel like I often will attempt to help individuals kind of like connect with their breath, and then to use that to even like kind of connect to their nervous system, and even like a mantra, right? So like connecting the thought to the moment of the body, using the breath to kind of like initiate what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest response, right? So it's, oh, this is here, right? And this too. I can be present with this too. I take a breath. I maybe hold it for a moment. I let that carbon dioxide kind of like help with that rest and digest response to key it back down my nervous system. So where is it for you that, with yoga, helping individuals kind of connect to themselves in those moments and using the breath and the body to be present with that? Is there anything that you feel it could be helpful for our audience to kind of think about when it comes to yoga and that breath work?
For sure. I often say that the most important relationship we have in life is our relationship with our breath. And so just getting to know it, remembering that it exists, and taking time to be with it and cultivate the relationship. There's just a constant thread throughout the way that I was taught and the way that I teach. Keep bringing your attention back to the breath. And of course, within the teachings of yoga, the practices of pranayama are an entire body of knowledge unto themselves. So those traditional breathing practices that are meant to directly affect. So prana is our life force, the energy that flows through us, and it's meant to that energy in certain ways. And the first way is just to remember it, to connect with it, and then to start to cultivate the ability to consciously control or direct it. The first layer of the practice is awareness. Just becoming aware of your breath and noticing how it's flowing in and out. And, as soon as I start talking about the breath, I also like to acknowledge that connecting with your breath might not be easy. Taking long, slow, deep breaths might not be easy. If you are chronically stressed in some way, that can be a practice unto itself, just to feel like you're taking a full breath all the way in, or like you're able to relax your belly enough to just soften the belly and even feel your breath moving in your belly. If we're chronically stressed, or if we just are tight, there's a shallower chest breathing that happens. So, can you drop down into your belly? Can you just, without even paying attention to your breath, can you feel your body soften? Can you find a steadiness in your gaze, whether your eyes are open or closed? Can you become aware of, where you might be clenching? And then start to tune into your breath. And then just gradually, everything is gradual, and notice the natural flow of your breath, and then just start to make it longer. So one of the most traditional yoga breathing practices is to cultivate, in modern day breathwork stuff, there's all kinds of talk about all kinds of things, including breath ratio, which is a very traditional pranayama practice. And so just beginning to become aware, can you make your inhale and exhale approximately equal in length? And then from there, starting to make your exhales even longer, because that's where you start to activate that parasympathetic response. Your vagus nerve loves those long exhales. And so that would be the first step, is whatever you got to do to get to those long exhales. And then spend 5 minutes just repeating inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. And it doesn't have to be, some big long period of time. Just little, whatever you're comfortable with. So
1 minute, 3 minutes, 30 seconds, if that's all you feel like you can tolerate in that moment, and then see if you can approach it again. And the vagus nerve, just as like a back info, is that like the vagus nerve helps communicate to your nervous system whether or not it's safe and you're not going to get eaten by a lion, right? So it's like, hey, I'm actually not in danger. I'm not going to get eaten by this lion or bear right now. So I can tolerate this and I can slow down. And it's kind of like, you think about a gear on a car, right? You're shifting down. You don't have to rev up the engine to 150 miles per hour and burn the engine out. Right? Thanks for sharing that, Kerri.
So when it comes to resilience, everything that I started off learning about the nervous system within the world of trauma-informed care. And then I got into studying polyvagal theory, which I'm not going to talk about too much right now, but I do need to acknowledge that, because in a nutshell, polyvagal theory is basically the science of the connection between psychology and physiology, and how the nervous system plays a role in that. And the vagal in polyvagal is just referring to the vagus nerve as the central command nerve of our parasympathetic nervous system. And there are two circuits within the vagus nerve. And the parasympathetic nervous system exists in relationship to the sympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic nervous system is like pushing the gas pedal, and the parasympathetic is pushing the brake. And we don't want to be slamming on the gas and slamming on the brake. We want to have these smooth transitions. So in a way, you could define resilience as being able to have the ability to transition, to put on the brake when you've been in acceleration or activation mode with your sympathetic nervous system. And you want to be able to put on the gas when you need it too. And having those smooth transitions and being able to come back into a more regulated state when you've gone out of a regulated state. So, there's so much subtlety when you really get into connecting with your breath and these pranayama practices, these amazing, just very simple, very ancient techniques, but it's a subtle awareness. So, sitting down and connecting with your breath and having an internal focus isn't always easy because of what's going on in your mind. But getting to know, like, where does it feel constricted and where might you be able to just soften a bit to allow it to flow better or more, all of those things are important. And again, just to get to that place where you're able to water the garden of your nervous system on a regular basis with a practice of repetition to help rewire those neural pathways. I mean, that's how we got to where we are. Wherever we are, we've got patterns of movement, patterns of behavior, patterns of thought, and they're either serving us for our highest good or they're not. And so when we can cultivate that awareness, we can start to see like, oh, that pattern is not, serving my highest good. And then you have a sense of empowerment to choose differently. And that's not easy. It's not easy.
Right, absolutely. And through practice, repetition, and consistency, even little spurts of our day and just meeting ourselves in where we are and just being okay with the discomforts of our mind and trying to practice a curiosity rather than a judgment of, I would say, the experiences of our mind, the experiences of our body, that alone, 3 minutes a day, whether it's breath awareness or a mixture of both, you're strengthening vagal tone. And so like you're strengthening your literal capacity for physiological and mental and emotional resilience by taking that deliberate practice. So like exercise, if you're doing particular types of exercise, if you're only strengthening one bicep, guess what? That left arm is not going to get stronger just because you're exercising the right? And that muscle becomes stronger and that muscle memory becomes a thing too, right? So we want to be aware that this practice does literally strengthen physiological connections. Again, this is not just theoretical. It is a literal practice that strengthens vagal tone. And again, all these other more whole brain thinking capacities so we can make more deliberate choices and feel less like we're just stuck in reactivity, including reactivity in our nervous system. So
your breath is the only physiological function that happens involuntarily that we can change to make it voluntary. And then it's related to so just in terms of the physiology of the vagus nerve, it comes out of our brainstem. There's nerve fibers that come up into our face and our sensory organs, down into our heart and lungs, and then down into our digestive organs. So as the ruler of the parasympathetic aspect of our nervous system and its connection to all of those organs, if the sympathetic nervous system has hijacked our system and the parasympathetic isn't able to function optimally, there lies the pathway to inflammation and disease, and on a physical level, but also, our emotional states, which are directly connected to our nervous system states, start to affect our physiology as well. So
exhaustion.
If there's anything
we
I would
can't
get
be
on
running on high
about, it's just about nourishing your nervous system, and learning the language of the nervous system and understanding yourself as a nervous system and what does it need.
Yeah, absolutely. Plug there. That is exactly what I teach and teach people how to apply. And that is literally the course that I'm developing right now, is providing the fundamentals of mental wellness, which incorporates understanding all the things you really foundationally need to know and the skills you can apply to make these things easier for yourself. But yeah, let's get into the fundamentals now, Kerri. I can read them off to you, or if you have them in front of you, if you want to kind of go over them. But what are some of the fundamentals from your perspective and experience? Do you want me to read them off for you?
I'm not sure what you're referring to as far as what I sent you. You mean like the tips?
Okay. Yeah, the tips. The fundamentals are the takeaways, right? So what are your fundamentals that you're sharing for other people to be able to apply into their lives?
Right. Yeah, I do not have those in front of me.
Okay. Well, I would have a few of these here.
Sort of, but
so reframing misconceptions about yoga. That was one thing you wanted to talk about. So we did talk about that.
Oh yeah, I mean that's just sort of like for the people who think they can't do yoga.
Yeah. What are some suggestions you have for creating space for joy, or simple things that people can do to either, again, bring in breath work, or simple things that they can do to like get involved in yoga if they feel uncomfortable about taking those steps, or other types of movement if it feels insecure to them to kind of take on some of these practices? What are some of these beginning strategies for breath or body that you feel it could be helpful for people to think about that could be a good stepping stone in a direction?
I mean, just I would say, find someone that you're comfortable, helping you with this. Obviously I'm available, but if you're just in your life and in your daily, activities, really just giving yourself permission to step outside of the mindset of having to be productive in some way and that rest is okay. And just, push the pause button. Learn how to push the pause button, even if it's just 5 minutes. Just stop what you're doing. You can kind of pause without, like, if someone was looking at you from the outside, they might not be able to tell, because it might just look like you're staring off into space or sitting with your eyes closed or something. Or you could lay down and just, moving your body and connecting with your body in a way, learning how to move in a way that feels good. That can be a challenge for a lot of people. So let yourself feel weird about, exploring some different movement practices, even if it's just laying on the floor, hugging your knees to your chest. One of my favorite things is a standing forward bend. You just stretch the whole back of the body when you do that. Or you could do it even just sitting down and just, there's a lot of physiological reasons and contraindications for certain things. But do you want to just do a little brief, short little practice with me just to make it tangible?
We'll make that like the fundamental, and then we can go into your quote. But one thing that I know, sometimes individuals are being introduced to things for the first time, we have a negativity bias. So our brain likes to go like, no, you can't do this thing. And this is the reason why you can't do this thing. So I have heard many, many times, well, I can't be with my breath because it just makes me anxious. That's okay. Right. So it's okay that your body's going to say, don't do this for this reason. Listen to it. It's not evidence of fact. It is your body conveying information. And that information may or may not be helpful. It may or may not be reliable. And nevertheless, non-judgmentally just approaching that with information. This breath is actually increasing my anxiety right now. There is nothing wrong with you if that happens to you. It happens to many people who have not had just that experience and that process of just being present with their breath. You can also attempt to start with something that could be, stroking your hand and just being present with that, and then seeing how that makes you feel, or touching something else that feels like a safer stepping stone. So it could be like rubbing your knee and just being present with that, and then trying to like kind of re-engage back with the breath again.
Yeah, using your senses is a good way to become, find something that feels good to look at, drink or eat something that tastes, just a little bit of taste stimulation, or some kind of essential oil or something that smells good, or the touch, what you just said, you can rub your hands together. You can put your hands on your heart. You can put your hands on your legs and just, bring yourself into a more present moment awareness of your physical body, just feeling your feet on the ground. If you're sitting, just feeling where your seat is and becoming aware of your connection to the physical support beneath you, those kinds of things.
Yeah. So like if something first feels too anxiety provoking, which I say like is like throwing you out of your window of tolerance, right? Find something that feels like it's still kind of like uncomfortable, but it's not intolerable. And then it could even be enjoyable, right? So again, like something that is like, oh, I really like smelling this essential oil, or I really like tasting like the ice cream. And I'm just kind of like enjoying having the sensations in my mouth. That is mindful awareness too. So eventually it's still good for you to try to practice like just an awareness of how you're breathing there. But if it's fixating directly on just fully and utterly on your breath in that moment, and it feels like too much, that's okay. Start somewhere that feels a little bit more comfortable. But yeah, Kerri, if you want to just a quick like 3 minutes of like how you would guide someone into like being present in that space, we can kind of wrap then into like the quote that you want to share.
Sure. And just one thing I want to say too is, I mean, if you're really wanting if you know that something needs to change in your life, or you're struggling with a physical condition that you need help managing, in which case you've already come into a certain state of discomfort, but you just have to remind yourself, like, it's going to be uncomfortable. You have to go through that limbo state, from the old to the new. And so just reminding, like you said, that it's okay. Maybe something causes too much anxiety, but just slowly keep redirecting your awareness back to these tools that can help you and be willing to be uncomfortable. Not that you have to subject yourself for long periods of time, but just, if anybody that knows that something's got to change in their life on the physical or emotional level knows that you're going to have to go through some discomfort to get there.
You have to explore it and expose yourself to it. Yeah.
And you need
and trust yourself to go at your own pace.
And a trusted guide or helper or friend or just one person that you can trust and feel comfortable and safe enough with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So are you sitting in a chair?
Me right now?
Yeah.
Yes, I am. I'm sitting in a chair.
Okay, so let's just, feel yourself in your seat, and you can let your eyes be open or closed, whatever feels most comfortable for you, but just allow a sense of softness to come into your facial muscles. If your eyes are open, let there be a soft gaze at one point, and just becoming aware of your seat and the connection of your feet down into the floor. Maybe even you can lean back into your chair. You can have a sense of lengthening up through the crown of your head, and just becoming aware of the flow of your breath just as it is, becoming curious about it, just noticing the inhale and the exhale. And then at some point, just gradually starting to make the breath longer, whether it's on the inhale or the exhale, and just still following those waves of breath in and out. And when you feel comfortable, taking a nice long inhale all the way in, as much as is comfortable for you, letting the exhale flow out slowly and completely. You can have your mouth open or closed, and you can start to repeat the longer breaths one after the other, or you can take a long breath in and out and then go back into a more natural breath and then go back into a longer breath. But just to add a little bit of movement, just let your arms dangle as much as will work for the chair that you're in alongside your body, and just tuning into that breath flowing in and out. Whenever you get to your next inhale, just let your arms lift up and bringing your hands overhead. So in your own time and your own pace. But once your arms are up, just hold them there, and your hands can be closer together, wider apart, whatever feels good. And now see if you can feel the feet down, pressing down into the floor as you reach up through those arms, maybe even extending through the fingers and really activating that engagement through the arms, and keep the breath flowing. And then after your next inhale, on the exhale, just let the arms slowly relax and float back down. And just let your hands rest comfortably, or you could rest your hands on your body somewhere, maybe both of your hands to your heart, or one hand on your heart, one hand on your belly, just whatever feels comfortable. And just noticing the feeling of the breath as it flows. You can stay with the longer breath or return to the more natural flow. And if your eyes are closed, just slowly let them start to flutter open and bring your awareness back into the room that you're in.
Thanks for that, Kerri.
And then just notice how that felt,
Yeah.
It's pretty
just
simple.
practicing a moment to kind of like readjust to the room and just be present with how you maybe feel in this moment, and even comparing it a little bit to how you felt coming into it, right? And just noticing that the physiological difference and the mental difference, right? Sometimes you can feel almost sensation in the mind, right? And in your face after doing practices like this. What's the quote that you'd like to share with us today, Kerri, that's meaningful to you?
The quote that I shared with you is that healing isn't linear. I mean, there's so many great quotes, but that's not really attributed to anyone in particular, but it's just a concept that gets circulated around in the world of healing. And there isn't a point A that leads to a point B. It's a journey and it's not linear. And so that is just meant to remind us that to have that compassion for ourselves and really learning. I mean, that could be one of the hardest parts, is just cultivating that loving kindness toward ourselves and that compassion. And just keep reminding yourself that you're okay just the way you are, even if you're struggling.
Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing all that today. And that's it for our episode. So thank you for joining us. And thank you, Kerri, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Know Your Fundamentals podcast. I hope this episode gave you some valuable tools and helped you feel more connected to yourself and others. Get more life, family, and career fundamentals when you follow Know Your Fundamentals on social media, including Instagram and YouTube. You can also join the Fundamentals Life, Family, and Career Wellness Facebook group. There you'll get access to live trainings, helpful resources, Q&As with our guests, and professional mom community that's here to support you in thriving your way. I'm cheering you on, and I hope to hear from you soon.